Well, good morning, good morning. How's 8:30 doing today? Look at you. Awesome, awesome. Those of you that know, I am not Jason. Those of you that don't know, I am not Jason. So, welcome. I'm glad you all are here today. Man, look at you. Look what you did. You got up this morning. You got yourself ready. You got here. Some of you have children and you got them up and you got them here too. That's a big deal. Like you made a commitment, you made a plan, you got up and you executed it. Maybe some of you, though, just sort of got up and went, I don't really have a plan. I think I'll go to church. Some of you got up, maybe you had no idea you were going to end up here. But irregardless, you followed through. You did something. You made a decision and you made it happen. Let me ask you a question. How many of you looked in the mirror this morning? How many of you spent any time in the mirror this morning? One person. Okay, we have a few. Some of you spent time in the mirror. How many did not spend any time in the mirror at all? Okay, how many of you should have spent, now that you have some time to kind of look at yourself, how many do you think you should have spent some time in the mirror, right? The mirror is a great place to go. It's usually where we end up in the morning. What do? We get in the mirror, we assess, we fix, and then we go. Maybe. I don't know what your routine is in the morning. You may have a routine where you're going to roll out, it's dark, you're going to put on whatever you find on the floor, and out the door you go. That might be your routine. Some of you have a routine that is like a plan of steps. Like the number of steps it takes to get you out the door, it is longer than what it takes to launch a space shuttle. Like you're spending hours getting ready to go. Do we have anybody here like that? Irregardless, there's things that we have to do. Now, there are some of us whose plan is to hit the snooze bar 4 or 5 times before we get up and do anything. Others of us have like this plan of like, okay, in the morning, I'm going to get up and I'm going to exercise, and then I'm going to have a killer breakfast because, you know, it's the most important meal of the day, and then I'm going to go in my fridge and get my lunch that I've prepared ahead of time so that I'm not spending money eating out all week, and I got this great plan, but then you're in bed, and you're just sort of hitting the snooze alarm, and you're not really following through with anything. Well, regardless, it all takes making a decision. And I hear now there's a new word for this idea of getting up and actually doing what you're supposed to do. Apparently it's called adulting. That's the thing that we call it now. It's become a verb, like apparently getting up and actually doing something and paying your bills or whatever, we call it adulting. Back in my day, we used to call it taking care of business. And they actually wrote a song about it. It's a 1974 tune by Bachman Turner Overdrive called Taking Care of Business. And I thought, I'm going to read the lyrics of this song. You know, I'm prepping for this message, you know. And here's one of the lyrics. So think adulting, think taking care of business, what grown-ups do. Here's one of them. And if your train's on time, you can get to work by 9 and start your slaving job to get your pay. Here's where it starts to go south. If you ever get annoyed, look at me, I'm self-employed. I love to work at nothing all day. I don't know if that's a plan. I don't know if that's adulting. It made it for a very great catchy pop tune in the 70s. But either way, whether you're adulting, whether you're taking care of business, a lot of times we end up in front of the mirror in the morning. That's sort of the beginning of our day. It's when we start to actually decide to do something. Now, what we see in the mirror is often what we're trying to get ready. We're trying to get the outside ready to go. But we know that the mirror is the great revealer. Like if you were to look deep down in the mirror at yourself, if you were to make eye contact with those two eyes that you're looking at, that is yourself, we see what we are, we see who we are, we see what we're going to do, and oftentimes we see why we do what we do. So let's extend the illustration just a little bit further. We're looking at reflection. We're looking at maybe self-reflection. And oftentimes when we're standing and we're sort of looking at self-reflection or we're looking at the things within us, we start to do things like we start to make deals with ourselves. We start to make promises to ourselves. We start to make commitments. So we think about all of the things that we would like to do, all of the things that we would like to say, how we would like to say them, behaviors that we would like to engage in. But oftentimes we don't follow through. Why? Because there are temptations, there are distractions, there are things that come about in our lives, usually in the form of people and situations. And what we do is we fall into the temptation And we sort of fall away from the follow-through of the commitment of doing those things that we sort of self-reflected that we wanted to do. And that's what we've been talking about in this series, In Case of Fire. So in case of fire, there's a plan. There's something that we need to do to get away from danger. So we've been looking at temptations and distractions and diversions as those emergencies, those things that we have to interact with. And we have to know what to do. And how do we do it? What is the plan? And what specifically do we do that derails us for the plan that God has for us? Because God has an amazing plan for us, and He loves us, and He cares about us, and He wants us to look to Him and to come to Him. Now, if you're new here today, and you're like, I'm not really sure about God, I don't even know if anything like that exists, I am really, really glad you're here. And what I would say to you is, listen to what this idea of God is. Because if it's really true that He is who He says, if there really is a universal divine being that really cares and loves us, that's a really good thing. And if you're here exploring that or you're not sure, man, you are in a really, really good place because He can stand the scrutiny. Because if He is who He says He is, then that's amazing. Because He wants the best for us. That's what I believe. That's what we would say. That He cares about us. He wants the best for us. He wants us to choose Him always. And if you're kind of somebody who's been around here for a while, you've been around church and faith for a while, from the most nominal believer to somebody who says you have a deep and abiding faith in God, well, I would just ask you to take today as an opportunity to sort of reassess where your faith is at. So today, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter how you come to this place of looking at God, whether you looked in the mirror or not, I don't care. We're all in it together today, and we're going to talk about the follow-through, the application, the doing of our faith. Before we get going, let me pray. God, the only way we make the car go is when we get in it and we put our foot on the gas pedal. It takes action. It takes some sort of initiating movement in our lives. And that goes the same with faith, because you have laid out for us this beautiful, this amazing plan. And what happens is that the difficulties of life, the surrounding noise, all of the things that are difficult will move us away from that. And God, you just have a way to show us how to choose you and how to move forward with you, but it takes the doing. So God, whatever it is each person needs to hear today, I pray that they would and that you would bring it to us. We love you and we pray this in your name. Amen. So we're going to be in this book a little bit later called James. What do I mean? Well, a book of the Bible, you can call it a letter, you can call it a section, but we're going to be in this part in James, and James is located all the way over in the New Testament part of the Bible. You have the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it's near the back of the New Testament. And if you don't have an easy-to-read version of the Bible, man, we really want you to have one of those. We have a table out in the lobby called the Get Connected table. And out there's some real fine folks that can answer all your questions about things that go on here at Forefront. There's a lot of different pieces of information there that you can get. And we also have free Bibles that we would love for you to have. But if you just want to walk up there and kind of get that and be anonymous and just get it and go, that's great too. There's also some really amazing digital versions of the Bible. One is YouVersion that you can get at your app store. It is really great. It's probably the most downloaded Bible app on the planet, and it has a ton of different translations in it. You can highlight verses. You can read reading plans. If you're not much of a reader, it will actually read it to you audibly, so that's really cool. And we also have our own app, the Forefront app, that you can get at your app store. And we really like that, and we're really working hard to keep improving that. Why? Because we want to give you a place to go, a sort of one-stop shop for your faith to kind of engage things that are going on here. So what can you find there? You can find a Bible there. You can take notes from what you hear up here. You can hear the various messages that are spoken here every Sunday. You can find a list of events that are coming up on kind of a calendar thing. You can donate to what's going on here. There's just all kinds of different things that are available in that app, and we want you to have that because we know that when people engage their faith, when they engage the Bible, they start to understand God. And that's really good, not just for the new person, but almost more importantly for the person that's been around for a long time, because we can forget. We can start to think. We can start to deceive and think that we know everything when we really don't. So that's why we provide that. And the reason why we go to the Bible every day is this idea of God's plan, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. What does that mean? Well, when we read the pages of the Bible, what we're reading is things that God inspired the various writers to put down on paper. So there's 66 of these different books in the Bible, and God actually told these guys, inspired them exactly what he wanted them to put down. And there's all kinds of things in there. You can read history, there's poetry, there's fine literature in there, there's biographical accounts of all kinds of different people. But the overlaying, the big message of the Bible is what God did. His story, how he brings about the world, how he brings us about. And he talks a lot in there about our interaction with him. And later in the New Testament, we get to this point where we're talking about a guy by the name of Jesus, who we read is God's actual son, who is divine also, and he's placed on earth at a very specific time for a very specific purpose. He had a mission. Just like yours was to get up and get going this morning, Jesus had a mission. And his mission essentially was to come and to save us. That sounds huge. And it is, because he got here on earth, and his job was to live a perfect life, and then to take everything that you and I have ever done, or ever will do, and be tortured and killed for that, so that we could live with God. It's unbelievable. It's crazy. It's mysterious. Totally get that. But it would have to be that, and it would have to be amazing, because God loves us that much. So it would have to be sort of out of this world kind of thing. Now, for the Bible itself, when you read it, it's been referred as a lot of things, but one of the things that it's referred to is as a mirror into the human condition. Now, I can say for me, my experience with the Bible, when I have looked at it and I have read it, I found it to be one of the hardest, clearest mirrors that I've ever looked into. Because when I look into it, there's wisdom in there that I know that I need to have. There's wisdom in there that I have taken on and begun to carry out in my life. And there's some wisdom in there that I know is really good for me, but that I will oftentimes not follow through with. And the reason I say this is because the Bible is often kind of given a bad name sometimes because people don't really understand and know what's in it. So a lot of people aren't very open to it. But when you read it, it's a very sober sort of presentation of ourselves. And that's why mirrors are so difficult sometimes. That's why things are difficult to hear about ourselves, because we want a really good picture. We don't always like to read about the things that we need to do better. But if you look at it soberly, and you look at it with an open mind, and you look at it with an open heart, what you're going to see is a way through every situation, every circumstance, every problem, every temptation. It will walk you through there. But here's the kicker. Here's what it can't do. It will never get up and make you do it. It will never make you follow through. It will never make you do what is in its pages. See, we have to decide whether we're going to do that or not. We have to decide whether we're going to be kind and compassionate and empathetic and loving. What we have to do is we have to apply it. And here's the takeaway for you today. Like, if you just want to check out from this point forward, take this with you. When it comes to the things of God and what he wants for us, application is everything. Action follows faith. Application is everything. Action follows faith. So I said we're going to be in the book of James, and we're going to look at 6 verses that talk about this idea of application. Talk about this action following faith kind of thing. In James, we've been in a little bit over the last couple weeks in this series. And if you want a very clear, simple, sometimes blunt presentation of the facts of the Christian faith, James is a great book to go to. It's 5 chapters long. It might take 20 to 25 minutes to read, but it will give you a very clear picture of what it would look like if we were to really do the things that God has for us. And really tells us 4 basic things. It says, number 1, that God is the ultimate and gracious giver, meaning that he loves us and he cares about us, so he gives us life, he gives us things that we can do to enhance our relationship with him. Secondly, that all wisdom comes from God, because wisdom leads us in good places, and that's what God gives us, amazing wisdom. It also talks in James about how temptations are not from God. That temptations are those things that we think up, that we conjure up in our hearts and our heads, that have us do something other than what he would have us do. And finally, number 4, James talks about that faith always results in doing, that it's the application of God's plan. So we're going to start in verses 19, and we're going to finish up at 25 in chapter 1, and you can follow along with me. We're going to have it up here on the screens, starting in James chapter 1, verse 19. And he says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror, and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do." When it comes to God's plan, when it comes to what he says, I'm paraphrasing, he says, do it. We read it, we hear it, we come to follow God, and then we apply it. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Forrest Gump. Anybody ever seen that? There's a scene in the movie when he's in the army, and he's putting his weapon together, and they're sort of having like a timed thing. And he puts his weapon together, and he says, "Done, drill sergeant." And then from the other end of the room, you hear, "Gump! Why did you put that weapon together so fast?" What does he say? "Because you told me to." Right. Because you told me to. And that's exactly what James is kind of saying here. That's very good. You want to stick around the rest of the day, that'd be awesome. But when you go back and you read these verses, they hit us in a very particularly difficult part of the way we are as human beings. He talks about our interactions with others. We know what that's like. He talks about our attitude, how we carry out our behaviors with our relatives or our kids or our spouse or our coworkers or people that we don't even know. And what he's saying here is, look, we all have a decision point. Okay? We can reflect God in how we carry out how we are in all the different spheres of our life. Or we can reflect our own, what we want, our temptations, the things that come into our head or onto our screens. James says to the follower, the believer, I want you to have a great attitude. I want you to strive for goodness because you know God. And this is for believers. This is for people who would say they follow God. You know God. You've been given a different way. You've been given a different view, a different mirror to look into, and that is Jesus. When he refers, the language in there in verse 21 is when they refer to the Word, they're talking about Jesus. Let's go back to the mirror for a minute. When you stand in front of the mirror for however long you do, you're taking stock. You're looking, and you're going, man, I would like what I see to change, okay? So you go to work and you start to change that. And you might get into the self-reflection mode if you're in the mirror for any length of time. You might start to think, man, I wonder what my day's like going to be like today. I wonder how my kids are going to be. Man, I hope they're safe. I hope I don't get any hassles at work today. I really want to try and keep it together today. Maybe it's just as simple as that. Like, I just hope I survive the day. So we look into the mirror and we look at ourselves, and sometimes we go, it's up to you, buddy. And what Jesus is saying, no, man. Look in the mirror that is me and let me walk you through that. I mean, read in the verses 22 through 24, it talks about looking in the mirror, forgetting what you see, and not carrying it out. That's what it's like when we kind of just take that cursory, quick glance, hope everything's going to be okay, and walk away. And what James is saying, no, look into that mirror that is God. Look into the mirror that is His wisdom, that is His Son who died for you, and then don't forget that when you walk away. Application is everything. application is everything. In fact, if you were to go to our website and you go to About and you scroll down, you're going to find application is everything as our 6th core value. It is so important to us that we be doers of the word. In fact, the language in our core value says turning belief and intent into doing. Helping people find and follow Jesus is by believing, having an intention that that is good and true, and then carrying out and doing that. And if you're new today or you're new to church and you're God, this is exactly what He wants for us. And it is incredibly hopeful. I don't know about you, but I really don't want to believe in something that is not good, that is not true, that is not enduring. And the divine God of the universe, His intention for God's people is to do the same thing. To be there and do it. So this year, my oldest daughter will turn 30, which makes me feel really old. And my youngest is 25, and she has been seeing a young man for a few months. And when you're a dad, it doesn't matter how old they are, she's seeing a young man. I'm watching. Now I'm listening to everything. I have friends that are watching and listening, you know. I got people, you know. So when I was getting to know him a little bit, found out he was in the Navy. I was in the Navy. So, you know, I'm hearing a little bit about what he thinks. And he talked about the Navy one day, and he said, you know, it's really not that hard. You just got to show up. You got to be there. And I thought, that is so wise. Think about it. In faith, we can talk all we want about what we do. We can talk about our intentions. But when it comes to the doing, are we going to show up? Are we going to arrive on scene and be ready to go? This is what James is saying. He's saying, look, don't be deceived. Follow the plan. Look in the mirror. The perfect life. As a matter of fact, it says, look intently in the mirror. Now, as I've gotten older, I've realized a couple things. One, I don't see as well as I used to. Okay? I've also learned that as an older male, you start to lose hair where you want it, and you start to gain hair where you don't want it. Now, since I live in a house full of girls, I hear about the hair that is where it shouldn't be. I'm talking ears and nose. My argument about the ear or the nose is that unless you're 9 years old or younger, you're probably not looking up my nose because I'm not that tall. But I will comply. But it means that I have to sit down in front of a mirror that's magnified and lighted. Yes, I'm sitting in front of a makeup mirror. And what am I doing? I'm looking intently. Because I can't stand in front of this regular mirror and just say, yeah, I'm good and go. I got to look intently. Think about that in terms of your faith. Think about in terms of those things that you want to be doing. Are you looking intently? That God has a better way, a wiser way than my temptation to just walk away and forget. That His way is the escape plan. That living His way is a decision. And it's every little thing, from the thing you want to put on Facebook to the thing you want to tell the driver next to you, whatever it is, it's a decision point. So almost 20 years ago, about 18 years ago, I am not a person of faith. I am not somebody who had God in my life at all. I would consider myself an angry person. I was in the military. I had a little bit of power. I mean, I thought really that I had everything in control, but I also had a deepening alcohol problem, and it was really beginning to cause some problems. There were some things coming to a head, and I really had to start making some different decisions. I got kind of put in a corner, and I had to make some decisions. And long story short, I got to a point where I began looking in the mirror. And I really didn't like what I saw. But then I started looking in the mirror that was Jesus. And it was in that moment, during that time, where, like my daughter's boyfriend says, I showed up. I made the decision to show up. I made the decision to get there and start doing something. I decided not to be deceived anymore. and actually look at the perfect Son of God, just like James tells us, every single day. So I've done that over the last 18 years now by getting into His Word, into this book. Rarely does a day go by that I don't touch on something, that I don't take a minute to write something down that I could apply in my life at that point. Serve, being generous. Those are the things that James is talking about. Pushing everything else aside and focusing clearly on what Jesus tells us. And I've been fortunate over the last 11, 12 years now to be on the staff of this church, and I've had the opportunity to meet with hundreds of people, many of which who are just coming to faith, but I've met and meet with a lot of people who are in faith. And we could talk a lot about the reputation that Christians have generally, just in our country. Unfortunately, it's on display in some very negative ways right now. And here's what I have come across with some people that are in faith. I hear things like, sarcasm is just how I am. It's always been like that. I'm just sarcastic. Or people say, I'm just an angry person. That's the way our family was. We just yell at each other, and that's just kind of the way I am. Yeah, I know I'm hard to get along with. But they got to do what I tell them. So they just got to deal with it. Yeah, I don't have any patience. That's just kind of how I am. I don't really like people. And when I hear that from people who follow God, and I am not perfect, it saddens me because James is saying, no, do not be deceived. You're deceiving yourself. You are His kid. He loves you. He cares about you. He sent His kid to die for you, to free you from all that, so that you could do what He wants for you, to look in the mirror, to lock eyes with Jesus and say, I want something different for me. We can stand in the mirror, and you guys do this. I do this. If you saw what I looked like before I stand in the mirror, you might, I don't know. But it doesn't look all that great. So we get all of this looking good. And we get our family all done up and everybody, and we get out in the car, and there's a nuclear detonation of arguments and stuff that happened, but by the time you get here, it's all good. Everybody's cleaned up. Everything is good to go. From the outside, it looks good. And a lot of us do this in our lives. We create and present an outward appearance that everything is great. But the question James asks us that we have to wrestle with is, what about the inner man, the inner person? This whole application is everything is saying, look at God's wisdom. Now, how is that manifesting itself in your life as you go about your day? You know what you can do? You can commit to start showing up in your faith. And again, I'm not perfect, and I am so imperfect. Believe me, it is brought to my attention daily. I know I'm not, which is why I know what I need to engage in to continue to reach for that thing that God has and not what I would do instead. I need His Word, His truths, the community here, good people around me. And I think a lot, especially in these tumultuous times. I've lived a fairly a long time, and I have to say very easily, this is a tumultuous time. And it makes me wonder about our faith. It makes me wonder about people who are of faith. What if the very, very notion of the word Christian brought about things like Christians are the most kindest people you will ever meet? Oh, Christians, man. You don't want to do business with anybody else. You want to find a Christian businessman. Let me tell you about one that I know. They have the highest ethics, the highest integrity. They are the most joyful people you will ever meet. Man, the world can be coming down around them, and man, they will surround you and take care of you. And generosity, man, they give their time and their resources. They are the most unbelievable people you could ever know, the most loving, the most compassionate, the kindest people ever. Unfortunately, that is not what we're known for globally, if you think about it. Why is that? Because we have a legacy of something else. We have a legacy really of not really doing, but we have an opportunity. So bring it into your own little sphere here. What's your legacy as a mom and a dad and a husband and wife, as a son or a daughter, as a professional? And there are many of you that are in amazing jobs that serve people and teach our kids and serve in our military and and all kinds of different trades and industry around here. Imagine what your sphere would be like if you took that James 1:22 and you became a doer in everything that you are. And if you're searching today and you're like, man, this is really heavy, like I don't even know if I believe in God, but this, man, it would be really cool if all these people acted like this. Would be amazing. Maybe I could start making a step in the direction of learning what that could be like. I will tell you that after 20 years of trying to live my life like this and watching great people around me do the same thing, I will tell you that change will not come like that, but it will come. When you take your time and you get to know and you practice and you take these things and you listen to them and you start to implement them in your lives. That you stay focused on what His reflection is and not the reflection that you see of you. That you stop believing things about yourself that aren't true. That you stop engaging in things that are not your true calling of who you are. God did not call you to be sarcastic and nasty online or dismissive. He called you to love, to deeply love, and to look in the eyes of the one who deeply loves you. See, when you look in the mirror, you're going to get a different reflection. And when you start to live this out and create this legacy, there's this ripple effect that's going to go out to the people around you, and you're going to begin to completely turn this world upside down. There's a writer, and he was a priest and just an amazing describer of things of faith. His name is Henry Nouwen, and he writes, "How different would our life be if we could but believe that every little act of faithfulness, every gesture of love, every word of forgiveness, every little bit of joy and peace will multiply as long as there are people to receive it." We cannot multiply things that we're not willing to do, that we're not willing to apply and give to the world that needs them. So when you came in today, we gave you something, and it's a little 2-inch mirror. And on the back it says application is everything. And I really wanted you to have this to take with you for a couple of different reasons. One, we put our identity in so many different things in our lives. I want you to look in the mirror when it gets tough. I want you to look in the mirror when you're bored. I want you to look in the mirror whenever, preferably when you're not driving. But anyway, I want you to look in the mirror and I want you to ask yourself, who am I? And I want you to remind yourself that you are God's, that He loves you and that He cares about you and that you matter, and who you are and what you're doing and who you've surrounded yourself, you matter to them too. And then the next thing I want you to do is I want you to, when you get to that point, when you're in that situation, in that circumstance that we all get into, when we're ready to reflect something else other than His good and true and perfect way, that you would look in the mirror, you would ask yourself, what do I need to do here? And then I want you to turn it over where it says application is everything. And I want you to go a different direction if necessary. Or maybe you just need to look at it and go, man, I needed that today. Man, I just didn't know what I was going to do unless I reminded myself of that. Here's the deal. It's about the doing. Action follows faith. There's a world out there. There are people in your lives that need that from you. And it's what God's intention was for you all along, to look deep within His eyes and get the reflection of Jesus going in your inner man. Because application is everything. Let's pray.